The order stands, Commander Vasek. Stand down. Captain Ren Aldrich's voice carried the particular weight of a man who had never been wrong in 23 years of command. He stood at the center of the Vanguard's bridge with his hands clasped behind his back, shoulders squared against the tactical display like a man facing an inspection, rather than a decision that would kill 900,000 people. Commander Sira Vasek did not stand down. Captain, I need you to look at the feed again. She pulled the holographic display toward her station, fingers steady despite the cold spreading through her chest. The tactical plot showed the Drevari colony world of Kethos Roman 4 in pale blue, its orbital defense grid marked in amber, and the estimated civilian population displayed in a number so large the rendering engine had dropped it to scientific notation. 912,000 non-combatants, residential zones, agricultural processing, a medical campus. The Drevari Compact's surrender terms were transmitted 41 minutes ago on an open channel. They are asking to negotiate. They were ordered to kneel, Aldrich said. Fleet Command's directive is specific. Any Drevari world that does not dismantle its orbital defenses within the specified window is a legitimate military target. The window closed 19 minutes ago. The window closed because the Drevari don't have the technical capability to dismantle their own grid in the time frame we specified. Their defense platforms are automated. They don't have override codes. They've been telling us that for 3 days. Not my assessment to make, Commander, and not yours. Vasek stared at the man she'd served under for 4 years. She had watched Ren Aldrich navigate engagements that should have ended careers, watched him hold the Vanguard together through the Calixan blockade when 3 other ships in the task force had broken formation and run. He was not a cruel man. He was not stupid. But somewhere in the architecture of his mind, the chain of command was load-bearing wall, and he could not bring himself to pull the brick. The Vanguard was a Solace-class dreadnought, the newest hull in the Terran combined fleet. 2.4 kilometers of gray composite armor, 37 weapons batteries, and a crew of 1,800 men and women who had spent the last 11 months learning to trust each other in the silence between stars. She had been launched 9 months ago from the Jericho yards with a commission that read like a promise, the most capable warship humanity had ever constructed. Her railgun arrays could accelerate tungsten penetrators to a fraction of light speed. Her shield generators could absorb kinetic impacts that would shatter moons. And right now, every one of those systems was locked onto a planet full of civilians whose only crime was building defense satellites they couldn't turn off fast enough. Weapons, what's the status of the bombardment package? Aldrich asked. Lieutenant Osai at the weapons console hesitated exactly 1 second too long. Package is loaded and locked, Captain. Kinetic bombardment solution targeting the orbital defense grid with secondary strikes on ground-based power infrastructure. Estimated collateral casualty projection is, he paused, swallowed, between 300 and 400,000 depending on population distribution at time of impact. The bridge went quiet, not the quiet of discipline. The quiet of 18 people who had just heard a number that didn't fit inside the word collateral. Vasek felt the silence like pressure against her ribs. She looked around the bridge and saw it on every face. Osai's jaw was set so tight the muscles in his cheek were trembling. Navigation Officer Pell had stopped pretending to read her console and was staring at the deck. Chief Sensor Tech Marrow had his hands flat on his panel, fingers splayed, as if bracing against something that hadn't hit yet. Even the damage control repeater at the back of the bridge, where Petty Officer Anne sat monitoring hull integrity, had gone still. Anne was 22 years old. She had joined the Navy to fix things. Captain, Vasek kept her voice level. I am formally requesting that you delay the bombardment and open communications with the Drevari Colonial Administration to negotiate a supervised dismantlement. Request denied. The directive is clear. The directive was issued based on the assumption that the Drevari could comply. They cannot. The intelligence assessment was wrong. You don't know that. I do know that, Captain, because I've been in direct communication with their colonial governor for the past 72 hours, and I have the technical specifications of their defense grid on my console right now. The platforms are Drevari Generation 6. They're controlled by a centralized AI that was installed by a military contractor that no longer exists. The Drevari civilians on that planet do not have root access to their own defense network. They literally cannot comply. Aldrich turned to face her fully. His eyes were the pale gray of old ice, and they held nothing she could argue with. Not anger, not doubt, nothing. He had made his decision the moment the directive arrived, and everything since had been formality. Commander Vasek, this conversation is over. You will return to your station and prepare the ship for combat operations. No, sir. The word fell onto the bridge like a stone into still water. Ripples of it reached every station. Osai's hand moved a centimeter from his console. Pell looked up. Marrow's fingers curled. Commander, you are refusing a direct order. I am refusing to participate in the killing of 900,000 civilians who are trying to surrender, Captain. And I believe it is my duty under the Terran Military Code of Conduct, Article 17, Section 4, to refuse any order that constitutes an unlawful act of war against a non-combatant population. The Drevari are a hostile power. The Drevari Compact surrendered 41 minutes ago. Their fleet withdrew from contested space 6 hours before that. The only thing preventing formal cessation of hostilities is a defense grid they cannot turn off and a deadline they cannot meet. We are about to bombard a planet that is trying to give up. Aldrich's jaw worked. For one moment, one fraction of a heartbeat, Vasek thought she saw something behind the ice in his eyes, something that knew she was right. But it was gone before it fully formed, crushed under the weight of a career spent never questioning the orders that came from above. Master at arms, Aldrich said without turning. Escort Commander Vasek to her quarters. She is relieved of duty pending court-martial proceedings. Chief Warrant Officer Bren stepped forward from the security station. He was a big man, quiet, professional. He put his hand on the sidearm at his hip and looked at Vasek with an expression that was not unkind. "Ma'am," he said just that. Vasek looked at the tactical display one last time. Kethos Roman 4, pale blue and defenseless. 912,000 people who had done everything they could think of to stop being an enemy. And it wasn't enough because the paperwork said they had 48 hours, and the machines in orbit needed 72. "Chief," she said, "wait." She turned back to the bridge, to the faces she had served with for 4 years, to the people who trusted her to be the voice of reason when the captain was the voice of duty. "I'm not asking anyone to do anything," she said, quiet enough that only the bridge crew could hear. "But I want every person on this bridge to look at that number on the tactical display. 300 to 400,000, that's the low estimate. Those are people. Drevari people, yes, but people, families, children, farmers, doctors. They are trying to surrender, and we are about to kill them because of a clock." "Commander Vasek," Aldrich said sharply, "you are relieved. Remove yourself from my bridge." "One more thing, Captain." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The Drevari don't know what a Solace-class dreadnought can do. They've never seen one. They don't have anything in their archives about our weapons capability because the Vanguard is the first of her class and all her specifications are classified. When they look at their sensors, all they see is a single human warship, one ship, and they think that one ship is here to accept their surrender. She paused, let the silence work. They don't know that one ship can crack a continent. They don't have a file for that. They don't have a concept for that. Their entire military doctrine is built around fleet engagements, and they've never encountered a weapons platform that can do what our railguns can do from orbit. Right now, at this moment, 900,000 people are looking up at us and believing that we're the reasonable ones, that we came to talk. Aldrich's face was stone. The order stands. Then let me go down there. The request hit the bridge like a pressure change. Osai's head snapped up. Pell turned fully in her chair. Even Bren, hand still on his sidearm, went still. Let me take a shuttle to the surface, Vasek said. I'll work with the colonial governor to isolate the defense grid's command architecture. If we can identify the AI core, we can disable it manually. The platforms go dark. The Drevari comply with the directive and nobody dies. And if you can't disable it, then you fire, but you fire knowing you tried, and the log shows you tried. The mention of the log was deliberate. Vasek saw it land. Every captain in the fleet knew that after-action reports were reviewed by the Oversight Commission, and the Commission cared about two things. Did you follow orders, and did you exhaust alternatives first? The directive said to engage targets that didn't comply. It didn't say don't try to help them comply. Aldrich's jaw worked again. The silence stretched. On the tactical display, the orbital defense platforms continued their automated sweep patterns, serene and purposeless, machines guarding a sky their owners were desperate to leave undefended. You have 6 hours, Commander. Aldrich's voice was flat, clipped, stripped of everything except the decision itself. If that grid is not down in 6 hours, I fire. And if you're still on the surface when I fire, that is your problem. Vasek didn't wait for him to reconsider. She moved, 3 steps to the lift. She hit the comm panel as the doors closed behind her. Shuttle Bay, this is Commander Vasek. Prep a Type 3 personnel shuttle for immediate launch. I need a technical team. Grab Lieutenant Corvo from Engineering and Specialist Enhara from Electronic Warfare. Tell them to bring everything they have for alien system intrusion. We're going dirtside. The shuttle was in the air in 11 minutes. Vasek sat in the cockpit and watched Kethos Roman 4 grow from a blue marble to a world, its atmosphere thickening from a thin, bright line to a sky. The Drevari were an insectoid species, their architecture visible from altitude as sprawling geometric patterns of interconnected hexagonal structures that covered the temperate zones like crystalline frost on glass. Beautiful in the way that alien things are beautiful when you have time to notice, which Vasek did not. The colonial governor met them at the landing zone. His name was Tevrath, and he stood 7 feet tall with the segmented carapace and faceted eyes typical of Drevari biology, but his body language radiated something Vasek recognized across species lines: exhaustion and desperate hope. Commander, his translator rendered his voice in flat tones that couldn't capture the harmonic undertones she could hear layered beneath the words. You came down. They said you would not come down. I'm here, Governor. Show me the defense grid's control center. There is no control center. That is the problem. Tevrath gestured with 2 of his 4 arms, a motion that encompassed the horizon. The platforms were installed by the Salathi Combine. They built the AI core into the orbital ring itself, distributed across all 41 satellites. There is no single point we can access from the ground. The system was designed to be maintenance-free and tamper-proof. Corvo, the engineering lieutenant, was already pulling up schematics on his tablet. He was a wiry man with the kind of focus that made him forget to eat when he was working, and he was working now with the intensity of someone who understood what failure meant. Distributed AI with no ground access terminal, Corvo muttered. Beautiful. Who designs a defense grid without an off switch? The Salathi Combine designed it to be sold, not serviced, Tevrath said. They went bankrupt 9 years ago. Their technical documentation was seized by creditors and is presumably in a data vault somewhere in Salathi space. We have been unable to obtain it. Enhara, the electronic warfare specialist, had set up her portable sensor array on a flat section of hexagonal paving. She was a quiet woman, dark-skinned and precise, and she worked with her equipment the way a surgeon works with instruments. "Commander, I'm reading the satellite network. 41 platforms in geostationary orbit, all active, all cycling through standard defensive scan patterns. The AI is distributing processing across the entire constellation. There's no central node to target. If we take out one satellite, the others redistribute the load. We'd have to take out all 41 simultaneously. Can we spoof them? Feed them false data, convince the AI that the threat condition has been resolved?" Inhara shook her head. "The AI isn't responding to any external inputs. It's running on internal logic based on pre-programmed threat parameters. As far as it's concerned, there's a warship in orbit, which means there's a threat, which means the defense grid stays active. Our presence is actually making it harder to shut down." Vasek felt the clock ticking in her bones. 6 hours. 5 hours and 43 minutes now, accounting for the shuttle flight. She stood on alien soil under an alien sky, surrounded by hexagonal structures that hummed with the low vibration of Drevari habitation, and she could feel the Vanguard above her like a physical weight. "Governor Tevrath, what happens if the AI detects that all external threats have withdrawn?" Tevrath's faceted eyes shifted, a movement that Vasek had learned to read as surprise. "The documentation we do have suggests the system would enter standby mode. Active weapons would safe, targeting locks would release, and the platforms would reduce to passive monitoring. So if the Vanguard moves out of sensor range, the grid should step down, but your captain has ordered you to disable it, not to leave. And if your ship leaves, how do we know it will not return with the bombardment already launched?" It was a fair question. Vasek looked at the sky and thought about Ren Aldrich, standing on the bridge of the most powerful warship humanity had ever built, watching the clock count down with the patience of a man who believed he was doing his duty. She opened a comm channel to the Vanguard. "Vasek to bridge, Captain Aldrich." "Go ahead, Commander." His voice was clipped, professional, already coded with the assumption that she had failed. "Captain, I've identified the problem. The defense grid AI is distributed across all 41 satellites with no ground access terminal. It cannot be disabled from the surface. However, the system is threat responsive. It will enter standby mode if it detects no hostile presence in orbit. I am requesting that the Vanguard withdraw to a distance beyond the grid's sensor envelope. Estimated range, 400,000 kilometers. Once the grid stands down, the Drevari will physically disable the satellite constellation using their own orbital tugs. Governor Tevrath has committed to a full dismantlement under our observation." Silence 5 seconds. 10. "You're asking me to withdraw from a combat position on the word of the enemy. I'm asking you to move 400,000 kilometers so that an automated system stops seeing a threat, Captain. The Vanguard can return to engagement range in under 9 minutes at standard acceleration. If the Drevari fail to begin dismantlement within a reasonable window, you can re-engage. This costs us nothing except time. It costs us the appearance of resolve, Commander." "Respect, sir, but resolve is not what 900,000 people need from us right now. They need us to be smarter than a 40-year-old computer program." More silence. Vasek could hear the bridge ambience through the comm channel, the soft chirp of monitoring systems, the low hum of the Vanguard's reactor, transmitted as a subsonic vibration through every surface of the ship. She could picture Aldrich standing at the tactical display, jaw working, weighing the directive against the woman on the ground against the number on the screen. "I'm looking at the directive again, Commander." Aldrich's voice had changed, not softer, harder in a different direction. The hardness of a man who was building a legal case in his head. It specifies engagement of non-compliant worlds. It does not prohibit temporary repositioning to facilitate compliance. If the grid stands down due to our withdrawal, the planet becomes compliant. At that point, the directive's engagement clause no longer applies. Vasek closed her eyes. She heard it, the sound of Ren Aldrich finding a way to do the right thing without admitting that his executive officer had forced him to. Acknowledged, Captain. I'm moving the Vanguard to 450,000 kilometers. You have 12 hours to coordinate dismantlement. I want physical confirmation of each platform going offline. If even one platform reactivates, I return to engagement range and the bombardment proceeds immediately. And Commander. Sorry. When this is over, you and I are going to have a conversation about the proper channel for operational disagreements. On the record. Understood, Captain. The channel closed. Vasek stood in the alien light of Kethos Roman 4 and breathed. Tevrath was watching her with every facet of his compound eyes, his 4 arms held close to his carapace in a posture she recognized as Drevari tension. Behind him, a dozen colonial officials and their families had gathered in the hexagonal plaza, drawn by the presence of the human shuttle. She could see Drevari children, smaller versions of the adults with paler carapaces and wider eyes, pressed close to their parents. Your ship is withdrawing, Tevrath asked. It's repositioning. You have 12 hours to begin physical dismantlement of the satellite constellation. How fast can you get orbital tugs up there? We have 4 tugs. They can reach geostationary orbit in approximately 90 minutes. Each tug can grapple and deorbit 1 satellite per cycle, with a turnaround of approximately 3 hours. He paused, calculating. At maximum throughput, we can deorbit all 41 platforms in approximately 31 hours. You have 12 to start and show progress. The captain will want to see platforms coming down. Get the tugs up as fast as possible, and prioritize the satellites directly above population centers. Tevrath issued orders in rapid Drevari, the harmonic layers of his speech creating a sound like a chord struck on an instrument Vasek couldn't name. Within minutes, the plaza was alive with organized motion. Drevari technicians moved toward the spaceport with the focused urgency of people who understood that their survival was measured in hours. Vasek set up a monitoring station at the edge of the plaza with Inhara's equipment. From there, she could track the orbital platforms and relay status directly to the Vanguard. Corvo went with the Drevari technical team to the spaceport to help interface the tug guidance systems with human navigation references, ensuring each satellite could be precisely targeted for deorbit. The first tug launched 97 minutes after the Vanguard withdrew. 7 minutes after that, the Defense Grid AI detected the absence of the dreadnought's sensor profile and began its standby sequence. One by one, the 41 platforms went from active defensive mode to passive monitoring. Weapons safed. Targeting locks released. The amber icons on Inhara's display turned green, one after another, like lights being turned off at the end of a long day. Grid is in standby, Inhara confirmed. All platforms passive. The AI core has entered low-power mode across the constellation. Vasek relayed the status to the Vanguard. Aldrich acknowledged with 2 words, "Copy that." The first satellite came down 4 hours and 12 minutes after the operation began. The Drevari tug grappled it precisely, fired a braking burn to lower its orbit, and released it on a trajectory that would bring it down in the deep ocean of Kethos Roman 4 southern hemisphere, far from any population center. The entry was visible from the ground as a brief streak of light across the dusky sky, bright enough to make the Drevari children point and murmur. The second satellite followed 2 hours and 48 minutes later, then the third. The tugs worked in staggered rotation, each one climbing to orbit, grappling a platform, deorbiting it, and returning for another. Vasek watched the count climb on Inhara's display. 3 down, then 5, then 8. She filed hourly reports to the Vanguard. Aldrich's responses were minimal and professional. Acknowledged. Continue monitoring. Note the time for the log. He was building the record, she realized, making sure that every step was documented, every timestamp verifiable, every decision defensible. If the Oversight Commission ever reviewed this operation, the log would show a captain who had followed the directive's intent, while allowing his executive officer to find a solution that didn't involve killing 500,000 people. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even agreement. It was the pragmatism of a man who had found a way to reconcile his duty with the outcome his XO had demanded, and Vasek understood that she would pay for the method even as the result was vindicated. 12 hours in, 17 platforms had been deorbited. Aldrich sent a message. Progress noted. Extending window to 36 hours. Maintain reporting schedule. The extension was its own kind of statement. 24 more hours meant the remaining 24 satellites could all come down without rushing. It meant Aldrich had looked at the trajectory, done the math, and decided that completing the operation cleanly was worth more than asserting the original deadline. Vasek allowed herself 4 hours of sleep in the shuttle's crew compartment. When she woke, Corvo was sitting on the shuttle's loading ramp drinking Drevari tea, which he described as tasting like someone had boiled a forest floor and added copper shavings. 23 down, he said. The tugs are running like clockwork. Governor says we'll be done by tomorrow morning local time. Any issues with the Vanguard? Not a word beyond standard acknowledgments, the captain's being very correct about everything. Corvo took another sip of the terrible tea, which probably means you're getting court-martialed the second we're back aboard. Probably. Worth it. Vasek looked across the hexagonal plaza. Dawn was breaking over Kethos Roman 4, the sky shifting from the deep violet of the Drevari night to a luminous amber that lit the crystalline architecture like stained glass. Drevari families were emerging from their habitation cells, beginning their day. Children ran between the hexagonal columns, their small carapaces catching the amber light. An elderly Drevari sat on a bench near the monitoring station, watching the human equipment with the patient curiosity of someone who had lived long enough to find most things interesting rather than frightening. Ask me when the last satellite is down, Vasek said. The last satellite came down 31 hours and 14 minutes after the first tug launched. Platform 41 entered the atmosphere over the Southern Ocean at 3:47 local time, and Enhara confirmed 0 active defense assets in orbit at 3:51. The Drevari constellation was gone, dismantled by civilian tugs under the watch of 3 human technicians and an executive officer who had refused a direct order to make it happen. Vasek filed her final report. Vasek to Vanguard. All 41 defense platforms have been successfully deorbited. 0 active defense assets remain in Kethos Roman 4 orbit. The Drevari Colonial Administration has complied with the dismantlement requirement. Recommending formal acceptance of the Drevari, compact surrender terms and initiation of ceasefire protocols. The response came not from Aldrich but from the communications officer, relaying the captain's words. Acknowledged, Commander. Ceasefire protocols initiated. The Vanguard will take up standard orbital position for surrender observation. Your shuttle is cleared to return to the ship. Report to the captain's ready room upon arrival. Vasek packed her equipment. Corvo helped Enhara break down the sensor array. Governor Tevrath walked them to the shuttle, moving with the careful dignity of a being who understood that the last 36 hours had been the closest thing to an extinction event his world had experienced. Commander Vasek, Tevrath stopped at the shuttle's ramp. His 4 arms hung at his sides, and the harmonic undertones of his voice were layered in a pattern she hadn't heard before. Gratitude, she thought, or something close to it. I must ask you something. Go ahead, Governor. Your captain, he would have fired. He would have killed us all. It wasn't a question. Vasek considered lying, considered diplomatic language, considered the dozen ways she could soften the truth. Yes, she said, he would have. And you stopped him. I didn't stop him. I gave him a reason to choose differently. Tevreth's faceted eyes were still. All of them, every facet, focused on her face with an intensity that made her aware that she was being seen not just with visual organs but with something deeper, some Drevari capacity for reading intention that she didn't fully understand. Among my people, Tevreth said, we have a concept, a word. It does not translate precisely. The closest human approximation would be the one who carries the weight of the better choice, the one who stands between the easy path and the right path and accepts the cost. We call this person the Kevrath Zal. It means, roughly, the conscience that has legs. I appreciate the sentiment, Governor, but I'm probably going to be court-martialed for what I did up there. Then you are a Kevrath Zal who walks toward her own fire. This does not diminish the concept, it strengthens it. Vasek shook his hand. It was a human gesture, not a Drevari one, but Tevreth had learned it from her staff over the past 36 hours, and he performed it with the precise solemnity of someone honoring a foreign ritual. His grip was strong, his carapace-bladed fingers cool and hard against her palm. The shuttle lifted from Kethos-Roman 12 minutes later. The Vanguard was visible in orbit now, a gray slab of composite armor against the amber sky, her running lights winking in sequence along her hull. She was beautiful in the way that powerful things are beautiful when they are at rest. 2.4 kilometers of human engineering, 37 weapons batteries, 1,800 crew. The most capable warship humanity had ever constructed, and for 36 hours, one woman had stood between that capability and its use. Vasek docked the shuttle and walked through the Vanguard's corridors alone. Corvo and Enhara peeled off toward their departments. The crew she passed in the passageways looked at her with expressions that varied from respect to uncertainty to something she couldn't name. Word had traveled. On a warship, word always travels. The captain's ready room was a small compartment adjacent to the bridge, furnished with a desk, 2 chairs, and a viewport that showed the curve of Kethos-Roman 4 below. Aldrich was seated behind the desk when Vasek entered. He looked tired. Not the fatigue of missed sleep, but the deeper tiredness of a man who had been arguing with himself for 36 hours and wasn't sure who had won. "Sit down, Commander," she said. "The Drevari Compact has formally surrendered. Ceasefire protocols are in effect. The Oversight Commission has been notified and will review the operation within the standard time frame." He paused. "The log reflects that you identified the defense grid's autonomous nature, proposed a withdrawal and dismantlement approach, and coordinated the successful deorbiting of all 41 platforms without loss of life. It also reflects that I refused a direct order, Captain." "It does." Aldrich leaned back in his chair. The viewport light caught the lines on his face, the gray at his temples, the weight of 2 decades of command decisions visible in the set of his mouth. "Commander, I want to be clear about something. I was going to fire. If you had not proposed the withdrawal option, I would have executed the bombardment as ordered. I want you to know that." "I know, sir." "Do you understand why?" "Because the order was lawful as written, and you believe the chain of command is not optional. Because the chain of command is the only thing that separates a military from a mob, Commander. The moment individual officers start deciding which orders they'll follow based on personal moral judgment, the entire structure of command authority collapses. Today you refused an order because you believed it was wrong, and you were right, and 900,000 people are alive because of it. But the next officer who refuses an order might be wrong, might be making a judgment call based on incomplete information, personal bias, or cowardice dressed up as conscience. And I have to build a system that accounts for both cases." "I understand the argument, Captain. I've understood it my entire career. I just couldn't stand on this bridge and watch us kill 900,000 people who were trying to surrender. No, Aldrich's voice was quiet. You couldn't, and that is both your greatest quality and the thing that makes you a dangerous second-in-command. He opened a file on his desk terminal. I've drafted 2 documents. The first is a formal reprimand for refusal to obey a direct order, which will go in your service record. The second is a commendation for initiative in identifying and implementing an alternative approach to achieving the operational objective, which will also go in your service record. Both, sir. Both, because both are true. You disobeyed me and you were right. The reprimand says the system still matters. The commendation says the outcome still matters. I refuse to pretend that either one doesn't exist. Vasek looked at the man who had almost killed a planet and the man who had let her save it, and she understood that they were the same person, and that this was the fundamental problem with command authority. It required people who would follow orders, and it required people who wouldn't, and neither type was sufficient alone. There's a third document, Aldrich said, an amendment to the operational directive for the Drevari Theater, requesting that Fleet Command revise the compliance timelines to account for technical constraints in automated defense systems. I've cited your field assessment. If it goes through, no other captain will face this decision. You wrote that yourself. While you were on the ground, he closed the file. Don't let this become a habit, Commander. The next captain you serve under may not find the loophole I found. Understood, sir. Dismissed. Vasek stood. She was at the door when Aldrich spoke again. Commander. She turned. The Drevari governor. Tevrath, he sent a message to the ship while you were in transit. He asked me to thank the crew of the Vanguard for their patience. He used a word in his language. Kevrath saw. Aldrich paused. I looked it up in the linguistic database. The closest translation is the one who carries the weight so others don't have to. That's a generous translation, sir. It's an accurate one. Aldrich's eyes held hers for a moment, and in that moment she saw something she had never seen in Ren Aldrich's face before. Not approval, exactly. Not gratitude. Something closer to recognition. The acknowledgement of one professional by another that the right call had been made, even if the method had been unforgivable. Get some sleep, Commander. We have a surrender ceremony to attend in the morning. Vasek walked through the Vanguard's corridors to her quarters. The ship hummed around her, the deep vibration of reactor and life support and air recyclers, the sound of 2.4 kilometers of warship being alive. She passed the crew mess, where a dozen sailors were eating a late meal and talking quietly. She passed the armory, where the weapons lockers were sealed and the bombardment packages were being unloaded from the magazines. She passed the medical bay, where Dr. Kano was inventorying supplies for a humanitarian assistance mission that hadn't existed 12 hours ago. The Vanguard had not fired. The most powerful warship in the Terran Combined Fleet had held its fire because one officer had said no and meant it, and because one captain had found a way to let that no become the answer instead of the problem. In her quarters, Vasek sat on her bunk and pulled up the operational log on her personal terminal. She scrolled through the entries, the timestamps, the communications, the status reports. 41 satellites deorbited one by one, 912,000 Drevari civilians alive. There would be consequences. The reprimand would follow her. Some captains would see it and think she was unreliable. Some admirals would read the file and decide she couldn't be trusted with the hard calls. Her career trajectory, which had been aimed at a command of her own within 5 years, had just acquired a variable that no amount of exemplary service could fully erase. And the Drevari didn't know any of this. They didn't know what the Vanguard was. They had looked at a single human warship in their sky and seen a vessel, large but comprehensible, powerful but limited. They didn't know that the Solace class carried enough kinetic energy in its railgun magazines to reshape the geology of a small continent. They didn't know that the bombardment package Osai had loaded could have punched through their orbital grid. their atmosphere, and their crust in the same salvo. They didn't know that the ship hovering above them, while they carefully pulled down their own satellites with civilian tugs, was, by any rational military assessment, the single most destructive mobile weapons platform in the known galaxy. They didn't know because the Vanguard specifications were classified, because no alien species had ever seen a Solace class in combat, because the Terran Combined Fleet had built the most devastating warship in history and kept it behind a classification wall so high that the people it was pointed at couldn't even begin to comprehend what they were facing. The Drevari had looked at the Vanguard and seen a warship. They should have seen an extinction event with running lights. And one woman had stood between that extinction event and a world full of people who were trying to surrender, and she had said no, and the ship had listened. Not because the captain agreed with her, not because the crew mutinied, not because the system worked as designed, because Sira Vasic had found the seam between duty and conscience and driven a wedge into it hard enough to crack the machine open for 36 hours, just long enough for the right thing to happen. The Drevari would never understand what had almost happened to them. They would never know how close they had come. They would remember the human officer who came to their world and helped them pull down their own defense grid, and they would tell stories about the Kevrath Sol, the conscience with legs, and they would believe that humanity had been reasonable. They would be wrong. Humanity had been Sira Vasic, one officer, one refusal, one fragile, breakable, court-martialable act of moral conviction that had bent the trajectory of the most powerful warship ever built just far enough to miss. The log would show a successful operation, a negotiated dismantlement, a ceasefire initiated without casualties, clean, professional, admirable. The log would not show the moment on the bridge when Vasic had said no, and the future had split in two, and 912,000 lives had passed through the gap between what was ordered and what was right. She closed the terminal, lay back on her bunk, closed her eyes. The Vanguard hummed around her, patient and vast and terrible, holding its fire. Below, on Kethos Roman 4, the amber dawn was breaking again. The children were running between the hexagonal columns. The elderly Drevari was back on his bench, watching the sky where 41 satellites had been, and where now there was only light. The Drevari Compact logged the event as a successful diplomatic resolution. The Terran Combined Fleet logged it as an operational adjustment. The Vanguard's executive officer logged nothing at all. Some things, she had learned, do not fit inside a record. They fit inside a person, heavy and permanent and sharp, and you carry them with you into every room you enter for the rest of your career. And when someone asks you what happened at Kethos Roman 4, you say the right words in the right order, and you leave out the 30 seconds on the bridge when everything hung on a single word spoken by a woman who knew what it would cost her. 912,000 people, alive. That was the only log entry that mattered.